My aunt was the one who finally told me. She called the night before my 29th birthday, and when I picked up, I could hear it in her voice. That tight, swallowed quality people have when they've been crying for a while and don't want you to know. She said she'd found something. She'd been working through my grandmother's storage unit, sorting boxes since my grandmother had been moved into memory care 2 weeks earlier, and she'd come across a folder with my name on it. She said it couldn't wait. She said that 3 times. I told her I'd come by after my birthday dinner. I want to tell you about that dinner first because it matters. It was me, 2 coworkers, and a woman I'd met at a pottery class who had become one of my closest friends. 4 people in a booth at a Thai place on a Tuesday. I had brought my own birthday cake, a small chocolate one from the grocery store, carried in a plastic clamshell container in my purse, because I was $30 from overdrawn, and the restaurant charged $14 a slice. That was my birthday. My mother called at 7:15. I answered because I always answered. She sang the first line of Happy Birthday in that bright, slightly performative way she did everything, and then, without taking a breath, told me that my half-brother had just been accepted into a master's program at Michigan. Full funding. His undergrad loans were already paid off. Did I know that? I knew. I said congratulations, and I meant it for him. I couldn't help the other feeling, that old hollow drop in my stomach that I had spent years telling myself was just jealousy, just weakness, just a character flaw I needed to manage. I said goodbye. I said I love you. I went back inside and ate my grocery store cake with 3 people who actually wanted to be there. Then I drove to my aunt's house, and everything I had believed about my own life came apart at the seams. Before I can tell you what was in that folder, I have to tell you who I was before I opened it. I grew up in a house where the rules were different for different people. I know how that sounds. Like a complaint. Like the kind of thing people say when they want sympathy for ordinary childhood grievances. I spent most of my life telling myself it wasn't that serious. It was just personality differences. It was just that my half-brother needed more. He was louder, he was younger, he had a different father who had left early, and my stepfather, who'd been in his life from birth, poured everything into making sure my half-brother knew he was loved of. I understood that. I still understand it. What I never understood was why that had to mean there was nothing left for me. My mother remarried when I was 4. My memories from before are mostly fragments. My grandmother's kitchen. The smell of something always cooking on the stove. The yellow curtains in her back room. My grandmother was the person who looked at me and actually saw something there worth paying attention to. She remembered things no one else bothered to keep track of. Which books I was reading, what I'd said I wanted to be when I grew up 2 years before. She called me her little reader. She told me I had a mind that would take me places. My half-brother arrived when I was 7, and I want to be accurate, because accuracy is something I have had to teach myself deliberately. I don't think my mother made a conscious decision to love me less. I think she forgot to make the conscious decision to love me equally. I've come to understand that both things can be true, and both things can still do real damage to a kid. The specifics are what stay with me. The specifics are what I go back to. When my half-brother wanted to play travel soccer, my parents drove him 4 hours round trip, twice a week for 2 years without complaint. When I asked about joining the school drama club, which was free, which met 10 minutes from our house, my mother said she just couldn't make the pickup times work. When my half-brother started high school, he got a new laptop. I got a hand-me-down from my stepfather's office with sticky keys and a cooling fan that screamed like a fire alarm every 40 minutes. It's perfectly functional, my mother said. Yours works fine. The college situation was where I stopped being able to explain it away. My half-brother is 3 years younger than me. When I graduated high school, I got a card with $100 in it, and a conversation at the kitchen table where my stepfather explained, very calmly and very kindly, that they just didn't have the resources to help me the way they wished they could. They believed in me. They were proud of me. But financially, I would need to figure out my own path. I was smart. I had partial scholarships. I'd land on my feet. I landed on my feet, technically. I got into the state school 40 minutes away. I worked 25 hours a week in a campus dining hall. I took out federal loans for what the scholarship didn't cover. I ate a lot of cereal. I ate a lot of eggs. I told myself this was how people built character. 3 years later, my half-brother graduated high school. My parents co-signed his loan for the first year at a private school out of state. Then, somehow, the math never made sense to me when I tried to work it out. They started covering more directly. By his junior year, they were paying his share of the rent in the house he shared with friends. They sent him home for every holiday on their dime. There was a monthly transfer that I found out about by accident when he mentioned it during a Christmas call, casually, like it was just a thing that happened. Maybe for him it was. I never asked my parents for money unless I had no other option. I had no other option more times than I like to count. The worst was February of my sophomore year. I was driving home from a closing shift at the dining hall, 11 at night, below zero, ice on the road, when my car just stopped. Not a gradual dying, a hard, complete stop. I managed to steer it to the shoulder, and I sat there with the hazard lights blinking while trucks shook the car every time they blew past. I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. I told her where I was. I told her the car wasn't moving. I told her I was scared, that the heat was already going, that I didn't know how long my phone battery would hold in the cold. She said, "I don't know what you want me to do about this, Rowan." Those 10 words, I still hear them. She said they were an hour away. She said to call a tow truck. She said this was exactly what happened when you bought cheap things, that she had told me this would be a problem. She said to be smart about it. And then she said she had to go because my stepfather's colleague was there for dinner, and it was rude to be on the phone. I sat in that car for 45 minutes before the tow truck arrived. The temperature inside dropped until I couldn't feel my fingers properly. I maxed out my credit card for the tow. I slept on a coworker's couch because my apartment was another 20 minutes past the shop and I couldn't afford another charge. I cried in the dark in a way I hadn't cried since I was small. I found out 2 months later, through a photo my half-brother posted, that my parents had taken him on a spring break trip to Cancun that same February. They had booked the flights, I would eventually learn, during the same week I'd been stranded on that highway. I didn't know then why that was. I thought it was just that they had more money set aside than I'd realized. I thought it was just that I was less of a priority. I told myself that was okay, that I didn't need to be a priority, that this was just how life worked for some people and not for others. It wasn't. None of it was. My aunt's house smelled like coffee and printer paper when I got there that night. She had the folder spread on her kitchen table, and she had been crying again. I could tell. She hugged me at the door for a long moment before either of us said anything. Then she sat me down and walked me through what she'd found. My grandmother had kept everything. Every document, every bank statement going back decades, organized in labeled folders inside plastic storage bins, stacked floor to ceiling in one corner of the unit. My aunt had been working through them for 3 days. That morning, she had found a folder marked with my name, my full name, and a date, the year I was born. Inside it was a trust document. My grandmother had established it the year I came into the world, funded with $1.5 million from the proceeds of my grandfather's business sale after he passed. The document stated her intent clearly. She wanted to make sure her granddaughter had the resources to build a life of her own choosing, free from financial precarity, free from having to depend on circumstances outside her control. My mother and my stepfather were named co-trustees. Their authority was to terminate on my 21st birthday, at which point full control of the assets transferred to me. I was 29. My aunt had also found 8 years of annual bank statements. My grandmother had requested copies every year and filed them away with her usual precision. Whether she suspected something, or whether she was simply being careful the way she was careful about everything, I don't know. By the time she might have acted on whatever she saw, her memory was already beginning to go. We spread the statements on the table and went through them together. The money started leaving the account the month I turned 21. Tuition payments to my half-brother's private university. $48,000 the first year, higher the next. A home renovation. I remembered the new kitchen, the quartz countertops, my mother FaceTiming me to show the subway. I was supposed to be thrilled for her. $67,000. A truck for my stepfather. $52,000. A resort booking in Cancun February, $6,800. I put my finger on that line. I read it 3 times. February, my sophomore year. The month I sat in a car on a dark highway with no heat, below zero, while my mother told me she didn't know what I wanted her to do about it. My aunt didn't say anything. She just put her hand over mine and let me sit there. By the time we finished, we had traced approximately $1.28 million in withdrawals. The remaining balance was around $190,000. I didn't cry. I thought I would. Instead, something clarified inside me, the way fog clears off water at a certain point in the morning, and suddenly the whole shoreline is just there, solid and obvious and unchanged. Every time I had asked for help and been told I needed to figure it out. Every time I had apologized for struggling, for needing, for being too much. Every time I had eaten the cheap thing and worked the extra shift and told myself it was fine. I'm fine, this is just how it is for me. I had been right that something was wrong. I had been wrong about where the wrong was. It was never inside me. My aunt told me she had already called a CPA she trusted, someone who handled estate disputes. She said, "I'm not letting you walk into that house alone." She meant my mother's house. She meant the confrontation she knew we were going to have. We set it for Saturday morning. My aunt called my mother and told her there was a matter involving my grandmother's estate that required a face-to-face conversation. She mentioned the CPA would be present. She did not mention me. She did not mention the folder. I spent Friday night at my kitchen table making a timeline. I matched every withdrawal to a memory. The year my half-brother's first tuition payment cleared was the year I had called my stepfather asking if they could lend me $400 to cover a billing error that had left me short on rent. I remembered the patience in his voice. I remembered him saying that this was just how adults learned, that I needed to be more careful, that they couldn't swing it right now. I had thanked him. I had apologized for asking. Same month, $48,000 out. I thought about every time I had made myself smaller so they could feel comfortable. I thought about all the years I had believed their version of me. Too sensitive, bad with money, not as easy as my half-brother, always making things harder than they needed to be. I thought about my grocery store birthday cake in a plastic clamshell container that I had carried in my purse because I was $30 from overdrawn. Saturday came. My aunt picked me up, the CPA, a woman with a measured voice and reading glasses she kept adjusting, was already outside when we pulled up. My mother answered the door. She looked past my aunt and found me, and something moved behind her eyes that wasn't quite guilt. More like the rapid, quiet arithmetic of someone calculating how bad this might be. My stepfather was right behind her. He was doing that thing he did when he was nervous, shifting his weight forward and back, like he was about to say something important and hadn't figured out what yet. We sat at the dining room table. The same table where my stepfather had explained, all those years ago, that they couldn't help me financially. The same table where my mother had served pot roast at my half-brother's high school graduation while I sat and smiled and said it was delicious. The CPA opened her folder without any preamble. "I'm going to walk through the trust document and the withdrawal history for the Rowan Voss Trust," she said. "I need you to listen without interrupting." My mother started to say something. My aunt looked at her and she stopped. The CPA read from the beginning. The trust instrument, the amount, my grandmother's stated intent, that her granddaughter would have resources for education, for housing stability, for the opportunities she deserved. The clause specifying that my parents' authority as trustees terminated on my 21st birthday, at which point all assets transferred to me. She paused there for 3 full seconds. "That transfer never occurred," she said. Then she began the withdrawals. My mother's face went from pink to white, somewhere around the kitchen renovation line. My stepfather had gone completely still. When the CPA read the February entry, the resort, the dates, the amount, I looked at my mother and said quietly, "I called you from the side of the highway that February. I was below zero. I told you I was scared and I couldn't feel my hands. You said you didn't know what you wanted me to do about it." She says, "Sure." "You were booking a vacation," I said, "with my money." My half-brother wasn't there. He was at his apartment 2 states away. No idea any of this was happening. I had already decided how I felt about that. He hadn't known, he couldn't have known, and I wasn't going to let them use him as a reason for me to stay quiet. That deflection had worked on me my whole life. Not today. My stepfather found his voice first. He said it was family money. He said they'd been managing it for the family as a unit. He said my grandmother would have wanted her resources to benefit everyone she loved. His voice was patient and reasonable, the way it had always been, and I realized sitting there that his patience had never been kindness. It had always been a way of talking past me rather than to me. "Whose name is on the trust document?" I asked. He looked at the CPA instead of me. She looked back at him and said nothing. My mother put her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook. She said my name like I had done something to her. She said they had sacrificed for me. She said I was destroying the family. I had been preparing for this moment my entire adult life without knowing it. Every question I had ever swallowed. Every time I had decided that my needs were probably not worth the trouble of voicing them. Every night shift and skipped meal and secondhand piece of furniture that I had called character building. All of it had been practice for being able to say the next thing out loud without flinching. "You don't get to cry to me right now. You had 8 years to say something, and you chose not to, every single year." My aunt placed the final set of documents in the center of the table. The CPA explained what would happen next: a civil suit for breach of fiduciary duty. A formal complaint filed with the State Attorney General's office for financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, because the trust had originated from my grandmother's estate, and she was now incapacitated and unable to advocate for herself. A full demand for repayment. My mother looked at my stepfather. "The house," she said, and the word came out like something collapsing. "It is likely you will need to liquidate assets to meet the judgment," the CPA said. My stepfather looked at me then. Really looked at me. I don't know if he had ever done that before. Actually looked at me as a person who was fully there and not just a background presence in a life he had organized around someone else. He looked like he was searching for the little girl who used to just accept things. She was gone. She had been gone for years. I had just been the last one to notice. "Rowan," he said, "what are we supposed to do? Where are we supposed to go?" I thought about every version of that question I had ever called home with. The car on the highway, the short rent, the textbook money, the gap between the scholarship and the actual bill. I thought about every patient, reasonable answer I had gotten. Figure it out. This is how adults learn. You can't expect us to solve your problems for you. I pushed the demand letter across the table. "I guess you'd better figure something out," I said. The legal process took 8 months. I will not tell you it was clean or easy. There were voicemails from my mother. I let pile up until my attorney asked me to save them as evidence. There was a long email from my stepfather with the word sacrifice in it 4 times. There was a week in month 4 where I nearly walked away from the whole thing because it felt like I was burning down a house, and then I thought about sitting in a car below zero with no heat while my mother said she didn't know what I wanted her to do, and I kept going. The settlement came through without going to trial. My parents sold the house. They cashed out a retirement account early and paid the penalty. Between everything, my attorney recovered $840,000 of the $1.28 million that had been spent, in addition to the $190,000 remaining in the trust. My half-brother's situation required a separate, painful conversation that I won't put in this story because it's his and not mine. What I can tell you is that he called me. He sat on the phone in silence for a while before he said he hadn't known. He said he was sick about it. I believed him then, and I still believe him. We are not close. We are not enemies. That is more than I expected. The first morning after the final transfer, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and paid off every student loan I had. Everyone. I had been making minimum payments for 8 years, watching the balance move in increments so small they were almost insulting. Telling myself this was just the cost of being the kind of person who had to do things the hard way. I paid them off in one sitting. I made myself stay there and look at the 0 on the screen until my brain believed it was real. I moved into a bigger apartment, not something extravagant, a 2-bedroom in a building with working heat and a parking spot, and a landlord who showed up when something broke. I bought a real bed frame. I bought a winter coat that was actually warm. I drove to Portland for a long weekend, walked around in the rain, ate at restaurants without doing the mental math on every item, and did not check my bank account once. I visit my grandmother every 2 weeks. She doesn't always know who I am. Sometimes she thinks I'm my mother when she was young. Sometimes she calls me by a name I don't recognize and tells me I have pretty hair. I hold her hand. I tell her that things turned out okay, that I'm doing okay. I think she would want to hear that. I think about the care she put into that folder. Every statement, filed by year, in order, labeled in her precise handwriting. Whether she suspected what was happening, or whether she was just being careful the way she was careful about everything. I'll probably never know for certain. What I know is that she saw me from the day I was born. She looked at me and thought, this one deserves a life of her own choosing. She tried to give it to me. It just took 29 years and a folder in a storage unit, and an aunt who loved me enough to make a hard phone call on the night before my birthday. I am not angry anymore, I mean that. The anger burned out somewhere around month 5 of the legal process, and what replaced it is something quieter and less dramatic. A kind of clarity about the story I was told about myself for my entire life. Too sensitive, bad with money. Always needing more than was reasonable. Always making things complicated. Not easy, not low maintenance, not as good as someone else, at simply existing without requiring anything. None of it was true. The story they built around me was something they needed in order to keep taking without feeling like thieves. They needed me to believe I was the problem. So I did. For 29 years, I was very, very good at believing it. I don't anymore. My grandmother wanted me to have a life of my own choosing. It came late, and it came hard, and it cost more than money to get here. But I have it. I chose it. I sat at that table and I said the true things out loud and I pushed the paper across and I walked out of that house and I did not look back. If you are out there carrying a version of this, maybe not the money, maybe just the weight of being the one who was always fine, always figuring it out, always somehow less worthy of softness than the people around you, I want you to hear this. You are allowed to look at the evidence. You are allowed to ask the hard questions. You are allowed to stop making yourself small so someone else can feel big. Hit subscribe. Tell me where you're watching from. And tell me one thing you chose for yourself this week, because I want to hear it. Every one of those choices is how you start building the life that was always supposed to be yours.